Good afternoon, friends. I am Rajesh and Vinod ji. Welcome.
Namaskar, this is Dr Vinod Asudani.
And today, Vinod ji,
Yes.
we are going to discuss one of the major themes in English literature. And many of the students of English literature are fascinated by it, and critics are also alike fascinated by it.
Yes.
And that's the metaphysical school of poets. Metaphysical
Yes.
school of poetry.
Metaphysical school of poetry. Those who are a little bit familiar with history of English literature, they know that at different times, different fashion or literary trend has been in the vogue. There are a few schools of English poetry.
Yeah, there are prominent ones. I mean, one is classical school,
Another is romantic
romantic
revival.
school, and we already spoken about the romantic revival.
Yes.
At this time, we are going to take up these metaphysical poets. The
Yes.
name was given by Dr. Samuel Johnson.
Instead of defining
Yeah.
what the metaphysical school is all about, it is better to look at some of the defining characteristics or features of this school.
But first, Vinod, why the name metaphysical? Meta means beyond, physical means bodily or physical, right?
Yes.
So, do they write about the things which are beyond the body or mystical things?
In fact, it is not that they write something which is not related to this world, but they make the familiar unfamiliar and unfamiliar familiar. That is their trick.
Okay, but the Romantics also did the same afterwards.
Exactly, but these people also have brought in some of the mysticism in the poetry, perhaps stretching the confines of their imagination.
So imagination plays a bigger role. Their similes are sort of different similes,
Yeah, if we try to place it in the time frame, the first 3 to 4 decades of the 17th century, they are known as the time of metaphysical school of poetry. And in the beginning, it was reaction to the Elizabethan poetry. Elizabethan poetry had flourished in the 16th century.
Yeah, but the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Right?
Yeah, that is from 1558 till the 1603. That was precisely the Elizabethan period.
Age of Shakespeare.
Age of Shakespeare, right?
Shakespeare lived.
So at that time, even Shakespeare and many other poets, they were writing poetry, and it was a flowery poetry, right? A lot of similes, a lot of metaphors, right?
Yeah.
But the time came when these metaphors and similes, began to look monotonous.
Yeah,
right?
they became stale. And you get bored of something.
So something new was required in the field of poetry.
Yeah.
So John Donne appeared on the scene, and he is considered to be the the father of metaphysical poetry. And he brought in this new fashion, and then he was imitated by a host of other poets, and prominent among them are Lovelace, Crashaw,
And Andrew Marvell,
George Herbert, etc. Henry Vaughan, right? All these poets share some basic characteristics when they wrote the poetry.
The subject matters, of course, were religious as well as non-religious, secular. So subject matters there's no such foundation that it should be mystical or religious. No.
Majority of them wrote law poetry, and as well as religious poetry.
Both.
John Donne himself worked as a bishop in the church, right? Even Henry Vaughan and George Herbert, all they were connected to the church. So you can find the strain of spirituality and strain of erotism, running side by side in the poetry, right?
Yeah, so like the prominent poem of John Donne, Valediction, Forbidding Morning. We'll discuss it in the next episode, right?
Exactly, and I would like to tell our viewers that John Donne is considered to be the greatest love poet in English literature.
Yes.
And anybody else who comes close to him is Robert Browning, right? Robert Browning. Now, the first characteristic of this school of poetry is newness. Anything that was new attracted their attention. They wanted to say something new that has never been attempted either in prose or in poetry. So simply they were driven by newness.
Yes. And then if the subject matter is not new, their imagination was new, their imagery was
Yes, their
new.
metaphors were new. Their style was new. And the second feature is abrupt beginning. All of a sudden they start their point. They do not give any hints, any preface,
no
introduction.
prelude, right? It just begins, it's what you call in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the things, right?
So abrupt beginning is there. Third thing, which is very important,
that is the unification of thought and feeling.
That's
thought
what
and
T.S. Eliot says. Unification of sensibility is very much at work.
Traditionally, nowadays we think of emotion and thinking as two distinct faculties of mind, and many times we say heart and mind don't agree, right?
But they bring the unification of both. So what they try to do, they deal with the thought as if it were emotion, and they analyze the emotion as if it were a thought. So that type of amalgamation of thought and emotion is intertwined.
And you can feel the thought, whatever you are thinking, the intensity of that thought is equivalent to the intensity of the emotion. It's not the cold rationality.
Exactly. And another important aspect of this poetry, these poets argue like clever lawyers.
Yes.
In the first few lines, they put forth their basic point or fundamental point, and the rest of the poem is simply a series of arguments to prove that point, right?
For example, John Donne's valediction, he says we should not be grieving at the parting of one another, right? How he proves his point is by giving many examples, many similes.
Yes.
So whole poem justifies why his beloved should not mourn his going away.
Exactly. So entire poem is nothing but examples after example to prove the same point, that while he goes away to some foreign land, his beloved should not lament. So another thing is, and one of the important and famous definitions, Rajeshji, that we must remember about metaphysical school of poetry, it is from Dr. Johnson. He says while defining metaphysical poetry, he says two heterogeneous ideas yoked together by violence. Heterogeneous ideas brought together, yoked together, brought together,
tied together,
right? By violence.
So
by violence, that means forcibly two seemingly dissimilar ideas are brought together. Usual simile is that when A is compared to B, there is basic similarity between A and B. Her face is as beautiful as moon.
This is a traditional
simile. That there is a beauty in the moon, there is a beauty in the face of the beloved as well. But the metaphysicals bring two dissimilar ideas and present a simile before us.
Particularly, he took the example of the simile of compass in the valediction forbidding mourning.
Yes.
When John Donne says that we are like two needles of the compass. I am the moving needle and you are the fixed needle. Then Dr. Johnson brought out this thing that these are the two distinct ideas when you compare the two lovers to the two needles of the compass. In that same poem, you find the similar two distinct ideas by violence yoked together. When he compares his going away with the lengthening of the wire of the gold by beating it.
Yes.
So this is still it strikes as something, it's not quite comparable.
Ordinary person may not be able to find the underlying similarity between the two ideas. But if you think deeper, you would understand that there is a similarity that is not obvious, right?
Yes. Maybe the contextuality here, he takes the images from the different context.
And this shows their learning. All these metaphysical poets were highly
learned people.
They were aware of history, geography, natural sciences, philosophy, astronomy, astrology. So while they composed the poems, naturally this vast store of knowledge came to their aid.
And anybody who thinks abstractly, Vinodji, and is a learned person, he or she is bound to think in multi-dimensions.
Exactly.
And therefore the basic that property of field independence, what we call in philosophy, something which applies to a certain set of things, the principle is applicable all across the domains. So it's called field independence.
See, across the domains, they appeal to us, right? Sometimes they bring in the knowledge from history, geography, mythology, biblical history, and so on and so forth. And therefore, the texture of metaphysical poetry is very rich. and subsequently these poems become obscure at places, right? Especially for uninitiated readers, they are very difficult to understand. Sometimes the readers are not able to catch what exactly the poet is hinting at. So obscurity, you can take it, is one of the characteristics of the metaphysical school of poetry.
To give a simple example from a Hindi poem, Vinodji,
Yes.
there is one line, I will just say it in English. Love is like moon. Love is like moon. It wanes when it cannot wax. So now here the person is dumbfounded to think what exactly the poet said.
Exactly.
So when it cannot grow, it begins to diminish. When the moon cannot be enlarged, cannot wax, so it wanes.
Yeah, but if you apply a bit of logic, so there is a point beyond which moon cannot become larger.
Yeah.
And then the tide is turned and it begins to decline, right? So that is exactly happens to love, that any relationship ultimately has to reach to a particular zenith, and beyond which that relationship cannot proceed.
So
and
this is the
decline and decay has to start.
Yes. So this is the field independence and logical abstraction which the metaphysical poets employed in their poetry, and they constructed their poem. We have already dwelt upon this, like a logical argument, like lawyer arguing in the court.
Exactly.
Like to his coy mistress by Henry Morgan.
Yes.
He says, if we had the entire time in the universe, we would make very slow love, but it is not the case, and therefore let us
proceed to make love.
Yeah.
So these are some of the important aspects about metaphysical school of poetry, and Rajeshji, we hope that the viewers and the listeners.
But I would like Vinodji you to substantiate these by taking a few examples of their poems and discussing them.
Yeah, in the coming episodes of this channel, you will find discussions based on some of the well-known metaphysical poems. So we'll be back very soon. Till that time, take care.
Yeah, namaskar.